Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture. Albion Never Dies. This summer, I've been doing the top 3 requested topics from listeners over the last couple of years, things that I haven't really tackled. One was the Church of England. The first episode on that, honestly, the content was great, but not everyone could hear it. It was very echoey. So I did a second episode, which is what is a Church of England service? And thank you so much to everyone who messaged me about that one, and indeed the first, letting me know there are issues. The second topic was my ranking of all the James Bond movies. There's a lot of rankings out there. It ended up that someone asked me to do a ranking article for a magazine, so I wrote for the magazine, and then I did the podcast episode to go with it. And of course I've been uploading my favourites for each Bond actors onto my YouTube channel, youtube.com/British Culture, and then I did some kind of deeper dive episodes on the British Empire. Again, that was a much requested topic. I did 3 episodes on Cyprus, and by the time this comes out, it should already be on my YouTube channel, 3 Generations of Brits in Cyprus, a colonial childhood. And I also did a couple of episodes on Gibraltar with my good friend Kane, who has taken me on many deep dives, a deep dive into tea, for example, deep dive into British men's wardrobes, that was really interesting, and the UK, not just London. So these were some really deep dives, and I thought maybe it's time to kind of step back to the primary question that this podcast asks, which is, what is Britishness? That is the guiding question of everything, and it's really interesting to go deeper and deeper and deeper down into the byways, the little paths that this leads to. But I thought, from time to time, it's really good to take a step back. Last time I did this, I asked everybody on my social media for their definition of Britishness, and I talked about that. For this one, I have returned to Chat GPT, still fairly hot in the news, and asked this prediction machine to give me 10 topics about the British Empire, about British culture. I said, hi, I have a podcast from British Culture, could you suggest 10 topics please? And what I find really interesting about this is that Chat GPT, it's not a database, it's not like Wikipedia, it can't fact check. It is a relatively simple AI machine predicting what word will come next. So if I say British culture, what words are associated with that? And it's also a little bit out of date. It's a couple of years out of date. So it gave me 10 topics, which in brief are: traditional British foods, 2 British monarchy, 3 British literature, 4 British music, 5 British sports, 6 British TV and film, 7 British comedy, 8 British festivals and traditions, 9 British accent and dialects, and 10 British history. And it also gave me a nice piece of advice. These topics should provide a good starting point for exploring various aspects of British culture in your podcast. Remember to conduct thorough research and engage your audience with interesting anecdotes, interviews and insights to make each episode engaging and informative. Hopefully that is something I've done over the last more than 100 episodes, but I thought that would be an interesting breakdown. So I'll talk for just a couple of minutes on each of the 10 points, and drawing on the research that I've done for all the previous episodes, but also reflect a little bit on that. So the first one was traditional British foods. It said, explore the iconic dishes and culinary traditions of Britain, such as fish and chips, roast beef, afternoon tea, and more. I thought it was interesting that food was the first thing that came up. Lots and lots of people say that British food is terrible. Somebody was talking to me earlier in the week about, well, you're in Britain, great place, but terrible food. Everybody says so. Years and years ago, I was teaching in China, and I was teaching some kind of cultural class, and there was a guy who just walked past. I vaguely knew him, and he's Chinese, and as he walked past, he said, British culture, British food, it's terrible. I was in the middle of a class talking about something completely different, but anyway, he went off to his thing, and when it was finished, he actually walked back the same way. I was like, British food, terrible, and I was like, what do you think British food is? What food are you actually talking about? It's like, I don't know what British food is. Like, So have you ever tried it? And I was like, I don't know, I might have tried it, I might not have known whether it was British or not, genuinely have no idea. And I found that really, really interesting. Like, if I ask people, about Britain, if they say British food is terrible, I'm always curious, what dish is terrible? What have you tried that's terrible? Obviously, there are tourists who come in, and unfortunately, everywhere, a tourist is in danger of being fleeced. But for the most part, I find when people have tried British food, a British breakfast or an English breakfast, most people find fairly decent, again, if you're not having it in some horrendous tourist trap. And, in fact, I've had a full English breakfast in America where they just call it an American breakfast, and it's the exact same thing, minus the black pudding, which I quite like. It's a blood sausage. But you don't get that much in the south of England either. I think Kane and I, when we talked about the UK, not just London, we actually talked about that, the different regional variations on it. So with regards to the breakfast, most people seem to like it. I was very fortunate. In the last few weeks, I've had a few friends from China actually come to visit the UK. So one friend is Cantonese, and she came to the UK. We had tea together at Betty's Tea Shop. Brilliant place, and she tried anything that wasn't too sweet. So for her, British food was too sweet. Cantonese food rarely isn't sweet. It can be quite salty. Whereas Americans I've brought, tried afternoon tea with, have often commented that British tea really isn't sweet enough. So you do get those regional variations, but everyone seems to like afternoon tea, and not just the cucumber sandwiches. It comes on this whole kind of series of plates if you're having high tea, as I think the Australians call it, where you get something savoury on the bottom, a little bit sweet on the middle layer, and something very, very sweet on the top. So you start from the bottom and work your way up. So afternoon tea seems really popular. British breakfast seems really popular. Fish and chips, well, that's a bit standard. I don't have a lot of seafood generally because, of course, I've worked on ships. Going in ships, you go into the harbour. In the harbour you get really fresh fish, and I feel it has completely spoiled me for seafood. But I took a Chinese friend to Whitby, which is famous around the world among certain types of people, because in the original book Dracula, that's where Dracula lands in the UK, and it's a beautiful place with its beautiful abbey, and the seafood is phenomenal. I think it's the best fish and chips in the UK. You're welcome to message me if you think you know somewhere better. My friend, again, is Cantonese, so they are very, very strong on seafood, but she thought it was brilliant. She thought the bread was brilliant, so good that she kind of wanted more to take away and bought it. The fish sauce was fantastic in her estimation. The mixed seafood was great. So again, I find it interesting that people say British food is terrible without specifically maybe knowing what it is, and when they try it, they really like it. So again, I'm wondering, where does this come from? I think some of my interviewees and I have talked about stereotypes, that some stereotypes, they're true. They exist for a reason, and they're still true. Some they were true, but they're no longer true. And some just seem to come from nowhere. For British food, a lot of explanations online say it's, when American servicemen came to the UK in the 40s, and of course Britain was on food rationing. So it might be from there, which is interesting, because before that, London was very much the centre of world trade, and they had all manner of different spices from all over the world. It was uniquely interesting in the Victorian era for having kind of spices and foods from all over the world. Goodness me, the national drink of the UK is really tea, which is not native to these lands. People often ask me, why do you call it Yorkshire tea or English tea when none of it grows here? And the answer is these are all special blends for the water, which varies greatly throughout the UK. The rocks are very different, even North and South London. I'm told the rocks in the ground are just very different, and it makes the water taste very, very different. So recently I've been in London. I got my Yorkshire tea, good, tried it. It wasn't that great. I should probably go for some other type of tea that's more local to here, because of course Yorkshire tea is designed for the water in Yorkshire. Anyway, why is it? Maybe it's just out of date. It was that one phase, and it's kind of caught on, especially I think with the British self-deprecating sense of humour. So it could be all those things combined. Quickly, I better get to point number 2. The British monarchy. Chat GPT said, delve into the rich history and current significance of the British monarchy, discussing topics like royal weddings, the Queen's role, and royal traditions. The Queen's role. Well, presumably this is due to Chat GPT's database being a little bit old. Around 4th of July, lots of people were sharing a meme. I've seen it a few times where it's like, in the US we have 4th of July and the UK does not, but the UK has a queen, but the USA does not, and somebody has scratched that out and say, well, at least we're even on one. This is totally untrue. The UK has a queen, and it's had a queen from the moment of the passing of the late Queen Elizabeth. The Queen is Queen Camilla. She is the Queen Consort. So we have a king and we have a queen. So I found that interesting. That doesn't seem to have hit, perhaps internationally, the fact that we do have a king and queen. There was a question for a while as to whether Queen Camilla would take that title fully, if she'd be the Queen Consort or something else, and that's one of those things that was gradually released. So it was first of all in a note circulated in the royal household of how to address her, and then kind of went wider and wider and wider in various circles. Everyone gets looped in at the appropriate time, and eventually it was just released, yes, she will be called the Queen Camilla. Of course, sometimes you do have a previous queen, a queen consort, who is still living. So, for example, if the king to which she is married passes away, then she's no longer the active queen, if that makes sense. Somebody else might be the queen. That's what happened when Queen Elizabeth II became queen. Her mother was still alive, but she took the title the Queen Mother. So there we have a tradition. One of the funny things about the royal family is that, well, they tend to trace their lineage back to 1066. In fact, through intermarrying with the old Anglo-Saxon royal family, you could say that they've been royals for quite a bit longer than that. However, they tend to go back to 1066. Even if we take that relatively shortened time frame, there have been quite a few of them. Like, even if you just take the monarchs, let alone all the various princes and princesses, it's very difficult for any of them to do anything that is absolutely without precedent, and if you're going to have precedent, you might as well learn from it, whether it's good or bad. So these traditions, they don't come from nowhere, and they also have great significance, perhaps not necessarily for them. For them it is simply their duty, they have to do it. It makes life a lot easier for the rest of us that we all know what we're supposed to do. I talked a great deal about kings and queens. I think those were requested in the alphabet episodes. K is for kings. I think H was for Henrys. So I thought I'd talk about all the other Henrys, not just Henry VIII there. And I did do Q is for queens. I didn't talk about Queen Elizabeth II too much. I actually wanted to talk about some of the lesser-known queens, since if there's plenty of content already out there, I'm always curious, what are we missing? Is there a gap? Can I add something? So those were perhaps non-conventional episodes, which I always enjoy. Something very conventional coming up with Chat GPT's third top topic for British culture, British literature. It said, discuss famous British authors, their notable works, and the impact of British literature on the world, including authors like William Shakespeare, Jane Austen, and J.K. Rowling. I always wonder, it must seem so strange for J.K. Rowling to find her name kind of automatically added on to those greats. Something that just came across recently is the fact that Shakespeare, and I believe this is right, never wrote hello in all his plays. No character ever says hello, because it wasn't really an English usage at the time. Hello was an expression in English of surprise, and then I'm told it kind of gets folded into the English language with the invention of the telephone, because when a telephone rings, what do you say? Ahoy, ahoy was one possibility, and I feel we were robbed. I feel we were robbed of that one. It's why Mr. Burns in The Simpsons says ahoy, ahoy when he answers a telephone, because it was one of the older ideas and kind of plays into the idea that he is 100 or 200 years old. My top exposure to Shakespeare, I do enjoy reading it, and I've seen lots of amateur productions. There are great movies. In the 1980s, Kenneth Branagh did a whole series of phenomenal ones, for which he got an Oscar, I think for Hamlet. But his Henry V I find really engaging, and of course it has Christian Bale in it as the child. There's only one, so you can spot him. has Judi Dench, has a whole range of great actors. And Kenneth Branagh's a rare actor, I find, who can be the director of the film and the star. And it's not weird, because as far as he's concerned, actually, Shakespeare's the star. Maybe that's why Rowan Atkinson once said, Kenneth Branagh, he's done more for Shakespeare than Shakespeare ever did. For a more modern one, Ralph Fiennes of M fame from the James Bond films, obviously, and also the English Patient and a variety of others. He did a version of Coriolanus, which is a very little performed play, but I have to say it felt like it was written for him, and he gives a powerhouse performance, and whoever plays his mother in it I thought was phenomenal. I thought, who is this? She was unrecognisable, but she was brilliant. I think it was Vanessa Redgrave, so there we go. That was two great films anyway, Henry V and Coriolanus. It suggests that I should talk about Jane Austen. Obviously, where would British TV be without perennially adapting all these costume dramas? There have been many versions of this. I think for a lot of people, the 1995 TV version is the best. The Keira Knightley one, of course, that was great. Very cinematic as a proper film, but the BBC version, that introduced the whole idea of Mr. Darcy in a wet shirt. So surely it's important for that. I also think it leaned in much more to it being funny. It actually made it all genuinely funny. And actually when I read the book, I was surprised how genuinely funny the book was. Many people complain that Shakespeare's comedies, for example, are not funny, which actually gets into the confusion that comedy at the time simply meant a happy ending and tragedy simply meant a sad ending. It didn't necessarily mean that it would be packed with jokes, although there are all kinds of puns that are great if you delve into all the notes and so on. As for J.K. Rowling, I've seen all the movies, but I've never actually read the books. They passed me by. I was too old when they came out, really. But I have heard Stephen Fry read one of them, the first one, The Philosopher's Stone, because he did the reading that was on Radio 4, broadcast in the year 2000 on Boxing Day. 8 hours uninterrupted reading. And so, like a lot of households, I think we just had it on, all the radios on, all on Radio 4, so as you moved about the house, you just kind of got to hear all of it as you went about your day, and I can remember that being a phenomenal event. It was a real event, and it's lovely writing. I'm told it changes throughout the series. I shall have to delve in at some point. Number four, British music. Explore the diverse and influential music scene in Britain, from the Beatles and the Rolling Stones to modern acts like Adele and Ed Sheeran. Well, obviously, the Quarrymen. The Beatles were iconic, and they played relatively simple tunes, musically speaking. The Fab Four didn't have phenomenal musical training in the classical sense, so those great memorable tunes are not musically complicated. They're also very, very familiar. So when you learn to play a musical instrument in the UK, and this has been the case for a very, very, very long time, you learn to play on the Beatles. So when you get a modern orchestra, you get a modern military band, what you have is every single musician in that orchestra, in that band, every single one of them is as familiar with those tunes as they are with literally any other piece of music, because it's what they learn to play on. So much as the Beatles were phenomenal in their day, and of course the old tunes, you hear them out and about, I rarely enjoy the Beatles as played by military bands and as played by orchestras. Of course, that other 60s icon, James Bond, famously said that effectively you shouldn't be listening to them unless you're wearing earmuffs. He said it in Goldfinger, because of course you're supposed to be slightly older, slightly stodgier, whereas here, of course, a Royal Navy commander, well, he might be singing their praises. It's funny, the character changes over time. As for the Rolling Stones, I do find it funny, Mick Jagger does put on an American-ish accent when he sings. Adele. Well, I couldn't miss Adele when I was in China. I remember when one of her albums was released, it was played 24 hours, 7 days a week, in pretty well every shopping mall in China, so she's captured that market, although they do get her name wrong. They always call her Adela. And Ed Sheeran, who bending back towards the Harry Potter area. I think he does look a bit like Rupert Grint, who played Ron, and I think Ron is in one of his music videos, and I looked at it online a little while ago, and there are endless comments. Ronald Weasley, what are you doing in a Muggle music video? You'll be revealing our world to the Muggles. There was comment gold there. Okay, topic number 5 from Chat GPT. British sports. Dive into the passion for sports in Britain, focusing on popular sports like football, brackets, soccer, rugby, cricket and tennis and their cultural significance. Well, Chat GPT didn't say snooker, but I have covered snooker once before on this podcast, and it's all due to the fact that the Victorians loved codifying things. They codified everything. It was the great fashion of the day because, of course, it had done them so much good. It helped drive forward the scientific revolution, the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution. Everything was being powered by their tendency to measure, to classify, and so on. I suppose at this time the equivalent is it's in your DNA. Private Eye magazine occasionally gets the most egregious examples of people saying, hard work is in our DNA. Well, no, it can't be scientifically, but it's the equivalent of just saying it's in my blood or it's my passion. Anyway, I find it interesting how far you can take certain trends, and then it gets into the area where it might not need to be applied. But anyway, for sports, the Victorians codified sports, creating leagues, creating rules, and so that's why we can often say, Britain invented this sport. Well, did we invent football or soccer? I'm pretty sure the Romans have records of playing ball games, and the Turks, there were nomads in Central Asia. They were playing a game similar to modern football, and I know this particularly sticks in my mind because my only qualification for speaking Turkish is my Turkish GCSE, the General Certificate of Secondary Education, which I took at a later age as I was living in Cyprus. All the other entrants were Greeks. The border had opened between North and South Cyprus, and the Greek businessmen were keen to get some basics in to help them make more deals, make more money. One of the translation exercises I had to do was on this ancient form of football played in Central Asia, including lots of unfamiliar words. That was deliberate, on part of the examiner, because it really tested you in terms of getting it from context and then providing kind of a definition, and then see whether you'd use like an English equivalent or whether you'd use it with a definition and so on. It was a really, really good exercise. Anyway, I got the highest grade possible. It's the end of that story. So it sticks in my mind. Of course, these ancient games have been played all over the world, but the British codified it. Number 6. Chat GPT says British film and TV highlight iconic British television shows and films, including classics like Doctor Who and Monty Python, as well as contemporary favourites like Sherlock and Downton Abbey. So Doctor Who, I've got to say I recently went to London Comic-Con, and it's only my second Comic-Con. The first one was San Diego Comic-Con, so that one is very, very hard to match. And there are some cultural differences at San Diego Comic-Con, and it's huge, it's well worth going, and people apply actually year after year trying to get in, so by the time they're able to get in, they will be in kind of full costume. It was a rare person not in costume, actually. I'd say like 99% of people were in some kind of costume. London Comic-Con is a smaller affair. To be honest, I didn't know there was a London Comic-Con until a friend told me he was going, so got a ticket, went. Most people are not in a costume, but lots of people have kind of a Doctor Who thing going on. Doctor Who is obviously much, much bigger in the UK than in the US. I'm not sure if it has been broadcast much in the US. I'd be interested if you're American, North American, and you're listening to this. Let me know. Let me know what your awareness of Doctor Who is. It's pretty big here. Especially as at this Comic-Con, and indeed one of the old Doctor Who's, Sylvester McCoy, was there, and he was absolutely brilliant. Because I went to one of the panels, which I couldn't do at San Diego Comic-Con. Very, very, very difficult to get to those things. They're too exclusive. Whereas here, actually much more open, friendly. You could wander kind of in and out. And most people wandered in and didn't wander out until the end. But it was okay. You could come and go quite happily. As I say, the old Doctor Who was very much the star of the show. And he was happily mingling with the audience, full of energy, absolutely full of energy. I was impressed, and very good with his fans. And he was talking about non-violent battle, because his version of Doctor Who was never going to fire a gun, was never going to fire like a rocket launcher. One script they had it, and he really argued against it. And so the rocket launcher was given to his female assistant, Ace, in one of the more enduring episodes, because again it shows that he can be a hero without punching someone's lights out. And I think it's interesting, in a few podcasts I follow have been talking about James Bond and how obviously he can be an action hero, but the more compelling films tend to have him doing some kind of battle of wits, whether it's the golf in Goldfinger, whether it's the, in Turkish it's called backgammon in Octopussy, those scenes, or indeed card play throughout Casino Royale. Yeah, the superior Bond films tend to have some kind of non-physical confrontation, a battle of wits. Anyway, it's a very strong feature of most Doctor Who's. Obviously there's different incarnations. Chat GPT suggested I talk about Monty Python, and I did an episode. S is for satire, and it's probably got the most number of responses for any episode I've done where people say, hey, not complaining, but you didn't talk about Monty Python. I'm going to defend that. I don't think it's a satire. I think it's comedy, and I think it's great comedy. But I have my doubts about it being primarily satire. I mean, I could talk about Yes Minister again and how good their satire was, but I feel I've already covered that. I'm not going to delve too deep into Monty Python. They've been hugely influential, and what I find most interesting about them is that you can look at British comedies before them and after them, and I think you can see a very clear, discernible difference. Like, they influence all other comedies, almost to the point that, as a relatively young person, when I watch the old TV shows, it's kind of weird because they planted the seeds that in many cases other people watered, other people kind of grew and flourished. Different aspects have been taken all over the place, except for the animations. Those standards have been completely unique. I do love them. But I always think it's interesting, they didn't come from nowhere either. Who were Monty Python influenced by? And they talk quite happily about how influenced they were by Spike Milligan. And his TV shows and radio shows are perhaps quite dated now, in part thanks to Monty Python. His books, however, are still brilliant reading, and in many ways they are satire as well, satirising kind of the war bore trend. I was in the war, yes, so was everybody, that whole generation, but lots of people would write, perhaps not so compelling accounts. I was Winston Churchill's policeman and all that. But Spike Milligan wrote his war trilogy, although I think it intended as a trilogy, ended up being about 7 books, but includes the titles Adolf Hitler, My Part in His Downfall, and Rommel, Gunner Who, and Monty, His Part in My Victory. And these are brilliant. So, for example, at the beginning of one of them, he has the quote from Thucydides, from the Peloponnesian War, I have described nothing but what I saw myself or learned from others, of whom I made the most careful and particular inquiry. And then Milligan follows it up with a note of his own saying, I've just jazzed mine up a little. It is a really, really good book. It's, I'll leave it at that for now, as I need to hammer through these topics. Sherlock is huge internationally. I think really interesting because whilst James Bond has been updated, every single time it comes out, it's always, set in the modern day. It could have all been done in the 50s. I'm not crazy about the idea of making films set in the 50s. Calvin Dyson just released a video on that, and he has arguments for and against. I come down on the against. I think having it update is what keeps it alive. Whereas Sherlock, there's no reason not to update it, but they've generally kept it in the original eras, either the Victorian era or the Edwardian era. So the idea of updating it to the present day, I think that was great, done by some of the same guys who kind of did the reboot of Doctor Who. And Sherlock is huge in China. Most of them are completely unaware that this is a series of books, short stories and so on. As far as they're concerned, it's Benedict Cumberbatch, and he is huge. So huge that when one of them came out, all the naughty websites in China that would normally give these to you without copyright refused to do so. Under pressure from fans, they said, no, you can't do this, we have to support this. And it was shown in cinemas, and I was going into coffee shops, and they all had, as if it was a release of like an Avengers movie or something, there was stuff everywhere. You wouldn't know it wasn't like a major film. You wouldn't know it was being broadcast for free on UK TV. And And the last one, the Chat GPT asked me to talk about Downton Abbey, which I've seen one episode. It had Samantha Bond playing the exact same role she always plays. She's brilliant at it. Why not? And every other British actor I immediately recognised doing everything they always do in every costume drama. So I haven't been compelled to watch it, although I do realise it's huge around the world. Okay, number 7 connects back to what I just said. 7 was British comedy, discussed the unique style of British comedy and its famous comedians, exploring the history of British comedy and highlighting notable shows and sketches. So again, can't talk about Yes Minister again, much as I'd like to. I would perhaps briefly comment on stand-ups. UK stand-ups tend to go for so many chuckles a minute, as opposed, it's an easy comparison to make to American stand-ups who do tell kind of stories several minutes long, eventually getting to a big ha-ha at the end. You can't interrupt the big story, and I've heard of a comedy club in the US where everyone's told very specifically, you cannot shout at the performers, they're here to perform, you must stay silent, which is the opposite of what you'd be told to do at a UK comedy club. A huge part of their talent, you shout back. The danger is, they're better at this. They do this for a living. So if you shout out, they will respond, and just watch out. I remember one guy, he started to tell a story, I'm an amazing golfer, and someone shouts, rubbish! Oh yeah, do you think that's rubbish? What, did you sit through Star Wars? And it's like, Millennium Falcon do 0.5 beyond light speed, rubbish! Yeah, I can 0.4 at the most, mate, come on, it's all made up. Panel shows. I think that's a big difference in the UK. Panel shows like Would I Lie to You? Have I Got News for You? They utilise this kind of faster pace of humour, not going for the big ha-ha, not necessarily looking to have you on the floor, but so many chuckles a minute. I did used to watch the international version of the US Daily Show, which funny enough was weekly, the Daily Show once a week. When I saw the American version, I have to say I found it incredibly slow. I felt it lagged behind, say, Have I Got News for You? But I think a lot of these, certainly satirical panel shows in the UK, also tend to go relatively deeper in that mixture of comedy and fact. I'm not sure how much of that is my perception, because I know more about British politics, but I'd say Private Eye magazine does a very, very good job of handling both sides. One thing that's uniquely British to my experience is pantomimes, kind of a comedy. It's a Christmas thing, a local play, with all parts reversed. So Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the dwarfs are played by men over 6 foot, and whilst you may have a leading lady, the leading boy is a lady, the ugly sisters are men, and so on and so on and so on. It's all over the place. Number 8. British festivals and traditions. Explore the colourful festivals and traditions celebrated in Britain, such as Bonfire Night, Burns Night, Wimbledon and Notting Hill Carnival. Bonfire Night, remember, well, 5th of November, isn't it? I've talked about that previously. Burns Night, great festival of Scottishness, a huge expat thing. I didn't see hide nor hair of it when I was here in the UK, but as I've travelled around the world, British communities always celebrate Burns Night, where any Scotsman is very much the person of honour there, as it is a celebration of Scottishness. Maybe I haven't come across it because I've been in England, but it's funny, English people abroad celebrate this in a big way. Wimbledon, the tennis, that's this weekend, and the Notting Hill Carnival, an annual Caribbean festival event that's taken place in London since 1966 on the streets of Notting Hill area of Kensington. In fact, last year happened to be in London in the run-up to the Notting Hill Carnival, and there was a lady in a spectacular costume, these huge wings and headpiece and all sorts. Kind of difficult to get past her on the pavement, but end up having a kind of an awkward conversation. She's like, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to be at Notting Hill, it's in 2 weeks' time, and I've got to practice walking around in this costume, and the organisers said you've got to practice walking around your neighbourhood, so just going for an evening stroll dressed in this extraordinary costume. Number 9, British accent and dialects. Examine the diverse range of accents and dialects found across the British Isles. Indeed, especially when I was in America, people commented on my British accent, and in China people say which is better, the British accent or the American accent, and obviously I said the British accent, but is there one British accent? Is that how it sounds to people outside? Because certainly being here, I can hear very much a range. As I say, I've been in London recently, and I hear accents I have only heard on TV. it's quite strange to me, but I'm told that's how Southerners feel when they come up to Yorkshire. And they're like, oh, you really do speak this? Do you go home and speak like that? Or are you just speaking that when you go out of the house? I did once go to a shop in Yorkshire. I think they heard my accent and so they started kind of doing it back to me. And when I explained, actually, I live in Yorkshire, I live outside Bradford, they immediately went into their thick Yorkshire accent, quite happy not to put on the clear-cut service accent that they were doing. So there's a huge amount there. Someone recently has been messaging me about it, and this is one of those things that saved away in my mind. At some point I'm going to have to cover this, hopefully not doing an impression of all the different accents. That's going to be tricky, although it's a basic skill for most British actors. Anyway, number 10, British history. Take your listeners on a journey through British history, covering major events like the Roman occupation, the Tudor period, the Industrial Revolution and World War II. I was fascinated by the fact that this is really low down on the list. Normally it's first up on the list. Tourists do not come to the UK to enjoy the weather. Although if you don't like it, it will normally change in 5 minutes. But these are 3 time periods I haven't talked about a great deal. The Tudor era due to my own lack of knowledge mainly, and I hesitate to say interest. I have talked about the Reformation, especially with the Church of England, but I haven't talked a huge amount about the Tudors. The Industrial Revolution I probably can focus on a bit more in later episodes. I live in the north, which was, driving the Industrial Revolution, the old rivalry between Yorkshire and Lancashire flaring up once again. As for World War II, I really haven't covered this. There are loads and loads and loads of podcasts on this. Al Murray has one, which is fair. I mean, his degree was history and German, I think. History and modern languages. But anyway, Al Murray has a podcast on this, and there's lots and lots of material. So I don't feel the need to fill the gap there. And that is all of the suggestions made by Chat GPT and my reflections upon them. I hope you enjoyed it. If there's one that you'd like me to do an episode on, send me a message. You can email me at albionneverdies@gmail.com. You can message me on Instagram, Fleming Never Dies, and I do requests. I thought this was a good one, just to touch grass. Is that the right expression? When you're going down internet rabbit holes, then it's just sometimes a good idea to go outside and touch grass. Well, this is an episode where I thought I'd pull it back from all the deep dives and just get some kind of an overview. I think it's good once in a while to get an overview. But soon I'll be diving deep, so let me know what you would like. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Thomas. Goodbye.